So welcome everyone to the launch of the Peter Maxwell Davies Research Network, and thank you so much for taking the time to join us this afternoon. And although it's very early days, of course, we already have members from around the globe, and we've got members already from the UK, from Austria, from Germany, Switzerland, the United States, and Australia. So it's a very, very warm welcome to you all. And I think that everyone is very familiar with the rules of engagement for these Zoom meetings now. But can I please ask you, if you haven't already done so, just to mute your microphones, and unless you're speaking, of course. So thanks for that. So for those of you who don't know me, I think I know a lot of people here, but there are a few I don't know. My name is Nick Jones, and I'm based at Cardiff University School of Music in Wales, in the UK. I'm the co-creator of this network, and the other co-creator is Richard McGregor. So Richard, can you please introduce yourself? You're on mute, Richard.
Thanks. I'm Richard McGregor, and I retired some 6 years ago, and now I teach part-time at the Conservatoire in Glasgow, remotely as at the moment, keyboard skills, which is an interesting concept. But I'm still an emeritus professor of the university, and I've got all sorts of other interests apart from Max, but I shouldn't say that here.
So obviously, Richard and I are extremely keen for the network to grow. So please do spread the word. I think there are 35 members so far, and I'm just looking at there are 17 of us here today, so around about half. So we're currently in the process of establishing a web presence. So you'll be able to point individuals to this shortly. We've also set up a Facebook group to enable members to communicate with one another and also to share information. So the two fundamental watchwords of this network are collaboration and cooperation. So having a quick and easy means of staying in touch with one another will be crucial for its development. So I'll send everyone a link to this Facebook group in a separate email, and we are recording today's session. So you'll be able to, see this video again, and I'll post this link on the Facebook group page. Now, Richard and I will also continue to use the official Peter Maxwell Davies Research Network email account to send out messages and information to everyone. We are also really pleased to welcome the trustees of the Peter Maxwell Davies Trust here to this meeting today. So very, very warm welcome to Sally Groves, to Sylvia Younger, and to Christopher Austin. So thank you so much for joining us today. You're very, very welcome, as I say. So the Trust has been very, very supportive to Richard and I in the development of our work on Max's music. So we are delighted that it is also supporting this new initiative. So at this point, I'm going to share my screen again and just give you an overview of the schedule for this afternoon's launch. And don't worry, we don't anticipating it lasting any longer than 1 hour. So I'm just going to bring the overview up for you here. So we're going to start with a reiteration of the mission statement and purpose of the network. Then I'm going to pass over to Chris Austin, and he's just going to give us a quick overview of what the Peter Maxwell Davies Trust does and its mission statement. Then the main part of this afternoon will be a discussion forum. And we have got 4 speakers, and the first one is Richard McGregor. Then we'll have Lauren Redhead, Chris Austin, and Chris Scobie will be also contributing that. And very, very warm welcome to Chris as well. I don't think Lauren is here yet. She said she's going to be slightly late, but she will be here to deliver her mini talk. And then we're going to finish today with a quick look at future events, how we are going to take this network forward. So let's start then with a mission statement for this network itself. So the idea of the network is to unite international scholars with interests in the life and music of Max. So it aims to create a focus for all kinds of research, analysis and interpretation centered on the life and music of Peter Maxwell Davies. It also is to raise awareness of and increase the interest in the composer's music, promote collaboration between researchers throughout the UK and internationally, and to address the needs of those engaged in musical research on this topic, whether early career researchers, independent scholars, performers, or composers, or affiliated members of universities, conservatoires, colleges, and other music-related establishments. It also aims to build an international online interactive research community for individuals and groups, and to make contact with other researchers who share interests in this area. And finally, it provides a forum for individuals to share their research through online and in-person seminars, lectures, and study days, as well as, where appropriate, online tutorial support led by established Peter Maxwell Davies scholars. And I will be talking at the end a little bit more about how we are going to take this network forward in terms of these research forums, and we're calling them Friday forums. And so a little bit more about that a little bit later on into the session. So let's move on to welcoming Chris Austin. He's a trustee from the Peter Maxwell Davies Trust, and I'm going to stop my share now. But before I do so, there is the website address. I'm sure that a lot of you here today have already visited this website and had a look at it. It's very attractively put together, and it's got some really interesting information on Max there. So, Chris, could you tell us a little bit more about this trust, please?
The trust was set up at Max's behest. It's one, in fact, it results from a fairly late on discussion between Max and Sally Groves. I mean, when Sally, who, just so everyone, for those of you who don't know, is Max's musical executor, and Sally made a trip to Orkney. In fact, it was to give Max his gold medal of the Royal Philharmonic Society, I think, wasn't it? And it was at that time a discussion was had, and that's when the idea of a trust was mooted, and it was Max who asked, obviously under Sally's guidance, and asked for Sylvia Younger, who's amongst other things is one of Max's oldest friends, and me, and I happen to know him mainly through our work at the academy together, to be on this trust. The purpose of the trust is, as you would expect, to, a bit like this network, to promote interest in Max's music and to support projects that disseminate his work in a particularly imaginative way. Like many composer trusts, we don't have megabucks at our disposal, but we're trying to dispense what there is and what little renewable funding that comes in as imaginative and impactful a way as possible. There's no formal application procedure as such, and people have been free and indeed have written to Sally about any number of things. And so far, I mean, Sally will be able to remember this better than I do. I mean, we have, as Nick alluded to, we've supported Nick and Richard's work with little bits of things to do with research expenses and so on. I would say that, I mean, even though, and this really shocked me when I looked at the calendar, we're next year, it'll be 5 years since Max died. It still feels as though the trust is in its infancy. The purpose of the website, and it's a very simple website at the moment, is it mainly functions at the moment by having an exhaustive and accurate catalogue of the entire oeuvre of Peter Maxwell Davies. And I'm sure, as everyone knows, Nick is actually responsible for the distribution of the catalogue numbers, the opus numbers, and the worked out opus numbers, which is, unsurprisingly, with Max, is still an ongoing process. Not only have there been some late works that have appeared since his death, as it were. I mean, not in a kind of Rosemary Brown sense, but in terms of us going through the nachlass, I believe is the correct term. Dr. Hyde will tell me about that. And also, we're looking to make available some of Max's juvenilia. There are some remarkable chamber and piano pieces from his teens. And even everyone knows the piece that was published when Max turned 75, I think, the Parade, which turns out to be a kind of source material for so much of the later music, which is, of course, a very important subject in understanding music, Max's music in general. But we're looking to make available some of those early pieces, so they're not merely something that can be researched if people make an application to go and see the schools that Chris Scobie is looking after, but to actually have them available as music to play. So, and last of all, because I'm aware that there should be something like the Gong Show where the Shepherd's Crook comes out, but the trust is currently in negotiations with the Atelier Sinfonietta Copenhagen to record a number of Max's works that haven't been recorded so far, some very early pieces and later pieces, including A Mirror of Whitening Light and the Trojan Games. So there we are. That's a rather too lengthy explanation of where we are.
No, thank you very much. It wasn't lengthy at all. It was very informative and comprehensive. So thanks for that. Might be an idea. Has anyone got any questions for Chris concerning the trust? Well, I think he did a pretty good job, actually. So you might not have any questions at this point. We can always revisit this at the end. But thanks, Chris. That was really, really great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, let's move on to the next segment of this afternoon's meeting, and I noticed that Lauren is here now. So welcome, Lauren. I'm really pleased to see you, and I'll introduce you officially in a moment. So this next segment is a discussion of Peter Maxwell Davies studies and the current state of research and the ways in which this area, I suppose, can be developed in the future, how horizons can be expanded, as it were. So I've invited 4 members of this research network to offer their own views on the latter topic. But before I introduce them, I think it'd be useful to start with a brief overview of the various research topics and musicological approaches that have preoccupied Davies scholars up to this point in time. So here I go again, sharing my screen, but there we go. So on one level then, Davies's entire output reflects the steady development and refinement of technical procedures he began to explore in his juvenilia and establish in the works that followed. His compositional methods have been discussed by many writers, and these have often resulted in different interpretations. So the first published articles started to appear in the 1960s and 1970s, and these were followed in the 1980s by two key studies. Paul Griffiths' 1982 book, Peter Maxwell Davies, the first one on your left there, and David Roberts' dissertation of 1986. So the approach adopted by David Roberts was fundamentally analytical and very score-centric, with its focus on pitch class matrices and magic square derivation. In the 1990s, this approach was allied with the study of Max's sketch material. In the last 20 or so years, there have been a steady shift from this, we can say, broadly positivistic approach to one that also embraces context and a wider sense of interpretation. And this characteristic can be seen, for instance, in the work of, say, Arnold Whittle, who critically engages with various aspects of Davies's music, predominantly through the lens of modernism. But of course, it can also be witnessed in a number of other seminal publications, including various journal articles that examine specific works, in the essay contributions to two multi-authored volumes devoted exclusively to Max's music, and they're both on your screen there. Richard McGregor's edited edition of a collection of articles from 2000 and Peter Maxwell Davies studies from 2009. And more recently, in the music of Peter Maxwell Davies, co-authored by myself and Richard and published earlier this year. So this publication provides a global view of Max's entire output and is based on several themes. And these include compositional technique and process, but also looks at genre, form and architecture, tonality and texture, allusion, quotation and critique, and landscape and place. So in many of the studies already mentioned, reference is made to Max's writings and spoken word pronouncements. And these items, which of course include articles, essays, speeches and lectures, interviews, and of course radio broadcasts and program notes, these are significant primary sources and therefore crucial research materials. And a number of these items were selected, edited, and published in 2017. So then, let me introduce you to our four speakers. So we have Lauren Redhead, who is the Senior Lecturer at Goldsmiths at University of London. Chris Scobie, creator of music manuscripts from the British Library. Chris Austin, who you've already heard from, but Chris is based at the Royal Academy of Music. And of course, Richard McGregor. Richard is Emeritus Professor of Music at the University of Cumbria and is currently a lecturer at the Royal Conservatoire of Scotland. So each speaker will will talk for 2 to 3 minutes on a separate topic. And once all speakers have delivered their mini talks, I will then open the floor for comments and questions. So please use the chat function at the bottom of the screen for any questions, or you can raise your virtual hand, of course, on Zoom. If you'd prefer to ask your question in person, then please do use that virtual hand. Or if you just type question in the chat function at the bottom, I can then call your name out and you can unmute yourself and you can ask your question. So enough from me. Without further ado, I'd like to start with Richard, please.
Thanks, Nick, and hello everyone. I'll just go straight in. It's kind of been assumed that there very little remains to be said about Max's compositional technique, the magic squares, the symbolism and all that. And there's an idea around that once you get to the early 1980s, he simply repeated the same basic formulae in each serious piece. And apart from perhaps a couple of exceptions, the pieces which had apparently less technical rigor about them were by and large less interesting as a result. Oh, why couldn't he just have kept doing those interesting things he was up to in the 1960s and early 70s? Well, Nick and I, as you know, take quite the opposite view. There is much that needs to be understood about Max's output, not just about those work that Arnold Whittle declares were his best, but much more deeply, for example, about the continual autobiographical elements which surface all over the place from the children's works all through to the last symphony and beyond. If place was important to Max, and it was, but he got fed up with people focusing on that in interviews and elsewhere, then so was his own understanding and exposing of his personal creative impetus. That's why his diaries are so revealing and important. Of course, there are aspects of the diaries which can't be made public and have to be embargoed at this point. But there is so much more to be found in them, and to aid understanding about how he worked, how he thought, and how he felt that informed his compositions. And more needs to be said about how he approached texts, particularly after 1980, but before, and of course, the relationship with Mackay Brown's poetry, and more about his approach to genre, about the modal tonality that he understood to be exploiting in his works, his approach to the expressive qualities of music, the importance of symbolism in his works, his treatment of form and structure in the broadest possible sense, the expression of his mercurial sense of humour within the music. And then, of course, we're back to autobiography. In short, there is much to be done in the interpretation of Max's music, and that can involve an in-depth analysis of his work, or several, because we know that some works are satellites of others, and Peter Owens pointed that out years ago. But we've got an exciting opportunity here with the support of the Trust, and clearly interest across the world to go further in Max Davis studies, something we can encourage, foster, and support through this network. Thanks, Nick.
Thank you very much, Richard. A great start there, and you've packed a lot in there, haven't you, in your 2 minutes? So hopefully that will stimulate lots of discussion once all four speakers have had their say. Could we go to Lauren next, please? Lauren, you're very welcome, Lauren. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I hope this is working. It seems that it doesn't want to do the video, but we persevere. Yeah, thank you for inviting me. And I suppose broadly what I'm talking about is applications of Max studies here. And those of us who knew Max, who I think is everybody, will be aware of the amusement with which he regarded the potential pitfalls for future musicologists studying his work. But also the way that he provided us with a really rich resource in the very multifaceted and multi-layered way that he was able to talk about his compositional practice. And that should have, I think, a very great impact on composition education. And that impact is already without doubt, because so many undergraduates already learn from examples of his early work as part of their studies. And Paul Griffith's book that was mentioned just a moment ago is obviously a very important aspect of that. But there is so much more potential in a technical study of his work by students of composition to be had. And just as one example, I want to take the genre of the string quartet, which in some ways bookended Max's early published book was a string quartet that he wrote while he himself was still a student, but also his final and posthumously published work is a very beautiful string quartet fragment that I believe made in 2016 in St John Smith Square when it was premiered. But aside from those pieces, the Naxos quartets, which offer really, I think, a large-scale study in Max's compositional techniques, not only for string instruments, but the myriad of ways that he heard tonality in musical material. And I think that that's a rich source of inspiration for composers wondering how 12 notes can be used innovatively in modernist composition today, creating color, texture, drama, melody, interpretation, association. And so despite his success as a composer, I think that those pieces and that work has been largely overlooked in composition education to this point. And this is before I even mention other string quartets that he wrote, or he uses the string quartet as a meta instrument in its own right in larger compositions. So because I've been asked to be brief, I'm not going to discuss every genre of his work, but I think anyone wishing to embark on either designing a composition curriculum for orchestral instruments and classical music genres, or any students could find an unending source of material and inspiration in his work. And in addition, I just want to suggest one more important avenue for Peter Maxwell Davies studies, and that is in Max's philosophy of music education. So, of course, he is well known as such a great advocate for music education in the UK, but also his personal approach to education, I think, is one that deserves further consideration. So, he engaged such large numbers of children, young people, and community musicians within work that has often been written off as inaccessible or of no interest to those groups. And in so doing, he supported them not only to develop their technical musical abilities, but their enjoyment of music making of all types. And so his work in Cirencester and at the St Magnus Festival obviously both deserve more in-depth historical study, but so too, I think, consideration of his music and educational philosophies and their applications in formal education and in the community. So I think that is a really rich area for those of us who are maybe struggling with the question of advocating for music education in the present day, and a place where we could find very much to inspire us and our students and to build on in our future education practice as well. So a second important area. Thank you.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Lauren. Yes, absolutely. It's music education could not be any more important than in the current climate. So maybe we could have a few questions for Lauren on that very topic, and another area for debate a little bit later on. Thank you again. Let's go to Chris Austin next, please. And Chris, I think you'll be talking about performance aspects.
Yes, I was going to. I'd like to pick up on something that Lauren. Hello, Lauren. We've never met, but it's very nice to meet you through this vehicle. It connects also with something the Trust is doing in the not too distant future. The last quartet fragment is going to be made available by Shots in an edition which will publish the manuscript alongside the engraved score, but also all the sketches in a color facsimile. And one of the things here, also to touch on what Lauren said about perhaps the possible models in what we can see in terms of Max's own technique. The one of the things that struck me when I first saw the sketch materials, and I have them all as PDFs. If anybody wants them, they should email me, because I'm happy to circulate those things. Is that his technique in relation to the poetry of the idea in this fragment is as clear as it could possibly be. It's we know it was the end of his life, and he knew it was the end of his life as he was writing this piece, and he also knew that the piece was not going to be the 50-minute big piece that he'd planned, but he brought the fragment to a neat score conclusion, but there is continuity in effectively two-part counterpoint for another 3-4 minutes, which in a way would be performable, or it's executable anyway. So because the instrumentation in terms of whether it's written for whichever combination of two instruments is completely clear, but he chose to bring the fragment to a conclusion, and it's not, and it can't be without significance that the fragment came to a conclusion on a D minor chord. And yes, in terms of education, my goodness, there's no end of times in the last few years, and not just about music and education and our culture in general, where I thought that Max would be contributing very vigorously to the public debate about the role of music, about the role of art in society, and so on. And that's something I think we all probably miss. So something that, but in terms of the role of Max studies in terms of performers, if you take David, I want to say David Beard, it's not David Roberts's classic PhD study, which is the one where he exposes the extremely intricate technical principle behind Alma Maria Redemptor, isn't it? The wind quintet. Am I right, Nick?
Alma Redemptoris Mater. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's almost in terms of its musicological approach, that's almost as extreme as the compositional technical approach that you find in a work like Prolation, for example. Whereas now, and it's also an approach that Max did think about rather wistfully, in the sense that he was intrigued that so many people wanted to reverse engineer his music. And in a sense try to imagine what might have gone on at the desk, and it's all extremely fascinating. But from the point of view of being a performer, for example, and there are several performers here, is that how does analysis feed into the process of score learning and the understanding of Max's music in the broadest sense possible, especially in terms of, for example, tonality, which, regardless of its controversial aspects in terms of the way that Max's music is, the difference between the way his music is written and the way it's perceived, is nonetheless an essential tool for any performer who's trying to internalize his music and perform it, which is the difference, obviously, between a plausible execution of the music and a real performance. A paradox of Max being such a busy conductor is that he, of course, understood everything about these aspects of his own music oh so clearly, but his inadequacy as a conductor technically meant that he couldn't actually, there's very little, in a sense, in his, and I watched him rehearse many times, in his rehearsal and indeed in the performance documents, that necessarily illuminates the kind of questions that you have as a performer. But that's certainly something that would interest me. And just to conclude, because this occurred to me, to come to Nick's reference and Richard's reference to this aspect of autobiography in the music. There's a period of Max's life where the diaries stop, which is, broadly speaking, the 1960s. And he said to me, as I'm sure he said to many people here, the reason there are no diaries for that period is because, he said, everything is in the music. There's a whole tradition in French literature in the last 30 to 40 years of autofiction, which to some extent you could say has its the sort of the godfather of that might be André Gide's Corridon. And Corridon was a book of huge personal significance to Max. He talked about how he got it out of the library in Manchester when he was a teenager, and he was able to get it out because the people who were issuing the books didn't realize that the subject of the book, because it was in French, was homosexuality. But he talked frequently about the importance of that text in terms of his own self-realization. And that there are so many, it just so happens that I've read a lot of work by a writer called Hervé Guibert, and when I've been looking at Guibert's work, I've been struck again and again and again by the parallels, both indeed technically, the composition of Guibert's work in terms of the way it processes his own life into something more abstract, and everything I've known up till now and observed in Max's music. It's an endless, I think, going to be a subject of endless fascination, because, and also it relates to Max's position as a gay man during the life that he had. If you think in terms of legislation around people's private lives and so on, there may well be research around this in terms of Max, I don't know. But I think when you consider how often he spoke about bearing witness as a fundamental aspect of his work as an artist, I think this too is something of great importance. And I think there are clues, even for those of us who know aspects of his personal life. I mean, especially people like Sally and Sylvia, goodness me, and Rodney, of course, who knew Max forever. It's also something that I think needs to be written about, to continue. This is the interesting thing coming from what you said, Nick, in terms of what we do to promote or to further the interest in Max's music. In a way, it's about how do we continue his work of bearing witness in the broadest sense. So there we are. Sorry about that. That's far too long.
Thank you very much, Chris. Again, there's a lot of things there to sort of discuss and unpack, and but thank you. Let's move on to our final speaker today, and it's Chris Scobie from the British Library. And Chris, you've got some slides as well. So do you want me to, I've got them in my slides here. Do you want me to show them now, or are you going to speak?
If you wouldn't mind. Yes, if you wouldn't mind sharing them yourself, that'd be good. Okay,
thank you.
Thanks, Nick. And yeah, sorry to have some slides, but I just thought it'd be easier to put across some of the information, and so you've got a reference point for future as well. So this bit is going to be a little bit about the source material for this research, for the research of different kinds. A lot of which, or perhaps most of which, is now at the British Library. We've got a pretty comprehensive collection of Max's material. He's one of those composers that the library's collected over a number of years and built up, as I say, quite a comprehensive overview of all of his different activities. So, I mean, composers like Elgar Vaughan Williams and Tippett and Max from the 20th century, we've got all the material that will help piece together that kind of seeing how things have been constructed and the biographical elements and all the things that we've spoken about before. So we've started collecting Max's material in the early 1990s. My predecessors, Arthur Searle and then Nicholas Bell and Andrew Patterson, sort of collected different parts at different things at different times. But I thought it might be useful to separate material out a little bit, because anyone that's used the library will know there's different catalogues and different material in different parts of the library in different departments. So it's worth probably just pointing out, first of all, that anything published of Max's or relating to Max, certainly if it was published in the UK, should be in the main printed collection, which I've just put the link to there. But the main manuscript and archival material is in a separate catalogue. And you'll see there that we've collected it in three parts. So the first dating back to the early 90s, and the second tranche in the later 2000s. The third part, which collected just before his death, and material that's come in after that, has been assigned a number, but it's still awaiting cataloguing. But I'll come back to that a little bit later on in the talk. The other thing to say is there's quite a lot of sound recording material which might be of interest, including a collection of his own a number of unpublished recordings and off-air recordings, as well as the commercially released material. So if you could just change the slide, Nick. Thanks. And I won't go through this, but this gives you an idea of the overview of all the different kinds of material that there is in the library's collections. So all those different stages of the compositional process are there, through to things relating to actually how things were published and put together, correspondence, the writings, reviews and press cuttings, all those recordings, and other things that don't quite fit in any of these categories, but might nonetheless be of interest for biographical research particularly. If you could just change the slide quickly. There's just a couple of pictures to give you an idea. I mean, some of you would be very well aware of all of this, but this is a different material relating to Taverner from some numbers, sketches for the text, drafts, and a pencil full score as well. And then the next slide, Nick. This is one I like, although not as much as the next thing I'm about to show. But this one I do like is Max's score of Patience, which he played in his younger days, with a note there. I'm not sure if anyone knows who Mottler it was and what was going on there, but it's a nice note, and the score itself is marked up with various annotations from when he must have been playing the piano in a performance of that. And then the next slide, Nick. And this is just to say that there's, as well as the Max material, there's an awful lot that relates to Max that's in other collections. So there's the enormous Boosey and Hawkes archive. There's correspondence with the directors in there relating to the works that were Boosey published, but also some of the production materials as well. So you can see those extra stages of seeing these works into publication. And then there's correspondence with other people that he interacted with. So the Michael Viner papers, William Glock, and other composer archives. So Gerald McBurney's archive, for example, got some good correspondence in. This picture here, this is another of my favourite items, which is separately we acquired a few years ago. It's Derek Jarman's sketchbook for costume and set designs for the production of Taverner that was to have happened with him and Ken Russell directing. And in the correspondence part of the Max material, there's some letters from Ken Russell as well, which are equally fascinating, and in lovely, great big florid handwriting. But these sketches are wonderful, quite different to how the production the production that came to be, but very, very, very colourful. Okay, and then that's, if you could move across, Nick, to the last slide. So that at this point, I suppose the main question is about accessing the material. And of course, most of it should be accessible in the reading rooms by anyone with a reader's pass. The currently uncatalogued material, which is any of the compositions post 2006, and some of the correspondence and papers and things. Most of these are listed now. So if anyone wants to get in touch with me, we can arrange access as if it's possible, especially at the moment. We're not quite sure what's happening at the moment with opening. But that material was due to be cataloguing was due to start this autumn. It hasn't at the moment, but we're hopeful it will as soon as we get back to the being full-time back in the building. And that's it, I think, for now.
Thank you so much, Chris, for that overview. And having used the British Library myself over the years for the last 22 years, and I know a number of us have already used it as well, but it's such a rich source for research on Max's music. Well, thank you all. I'm going to open the floor now. I'm going to invite Sally. I think Sally has got our first question, please. Sally Groves. Thank you, Sally.
My question is for Chris, really. I'm going back to performance. And I thought it would be interesting for people to raise the last postcard from Sandy as an example of how one could approach one of these late, very, very late works, but also Max's performance practice, especially in a piece where he's not left many clues.
Yes, there's we found amongst Max's papers, it's the archive that was on top of his piano, some two short piano pieces and a single page on his specially printed manuscript paper, a single half-page solo violin piece, and it's a complete miniature. It's modal, tonal, but you can tell it's Max. Has all the decorative tropes and so on, and it's the kind of thing he sketched so many examples of this throughout his life, not necessarily for a particular reason. We don't know what the reason for this little fragment existing is, but it exists, and it lacks only dynamic markings and most articulations. But in terms of the tempo shape, it's completely clear, and it's being published. And it was offered to the Royal Academy of Music as part of its 200 pieces for the bicentenary series. But the thing is, any player needs to make their own edition of the work to play it, or it's open for you to do that. So through dynamic, obviously, and articulation, there's no indication whether there should be any pizzicato, for example. And in fact, of the violinists who've played it so far, nobody's thought to do that. But it invites a real engagement with the music in a very particular way. And yes, I think is that enough, Sally? Do you think?
Well, I just thought we could alert the fellow members of the research club to the fact that hopefully there will be a performance supervised by you in part of the 200 pieces series, and which will be rather special because it could even involve more than one fiddle player. Yes,
the piece has already been played by an Academy violinist. It was played at the press launch for the Academy bicentenary thing a year ago. Was it a year ago? It is a year ago. My goodness, the pre-COVID time. And but the official premiere will be in 3 different versions, and we're going to notate the 3 different versions, and they will be published alongside in the same volume. Basically, the shot edition will be a clear scan of the manuscript page, the engraved edition, and then there will be appendices of 3 realizations of it, simply to give people a starting point. And it's it kind of entirely, by accident, it relates to a lot of the issues of education and how indeed performers engage with Max's music.
That's why I brought it up, and I thought we could alert the group to when it will be performed.
Yes, I am in discussions with Nicola Mutton, who.
Right, are you? Because she didn't respond to me, but I'm glad.
So I'm now, we are now discussing it.
Very good. Good. We'll keep everybody posted.
Thank you very much for that. Richard, you've got a question for Chris Scobie.
Yes, I have. And it's one that'll everybody will, I think, be interested in. Chris, what is Max was always keen that people were able to have actual copies of his music. I mean, in fact, when I wrote about the 4th, 5th and 6th symphonies, I actually had the sketches and away from Max for some time. What is the general position regarding making copies available, particularly at this point where we can't really get into the library itself? And is there any plans to make microfilm of sketches at any point?
Well, so I mean, the easy answer before all of this current situation, copies are allowed actually, and Max was one of the first composers where we managed to get a blanket permission from publishers and from him that researchers can make copies and have copies of material for research purposes. So that still stands if you were able to get into the reading room. What I don't know at the moment is what the situation is going to be in the next month or 2 about reading room access, and also what the situation about ordering copies is going to be, because while in theory you should be able to order remotely copies through the digitization service, that's probably going to be a little bit up in the air at the moment as well. I mean, I've been doing little favours for people when I can get in for various, not just Max, but trying to get copies of things as and when. But that's the sort of general position. In terms of longer term digitisation, we're moving through quite a lot of material at the moment. We haven't got, apart from Britain, is one of the few composers still in copyright that we have managed to digitise and put online with the permission of Boozy and Hawks for that. In that case, I think with Max, we'd like to, as we would with many other composers, but we'd have to make sure we've got permission to do that first. One other thing I was thinking about, related to what Chris was saying and Lauren had said as well about the educational side of showing how these sketches, the early stages, relate to the finished score. We've been doing some work recently on sort of annotated digital editions, I suppose, and digital exhibition spaces where things could be made available online, and through MEI encoding and things like that, we can sort of explain and demonstrate the relationship between the different forms of sign and the sound. And that's something we're putting together a proposal at the moment for a project with Oxford and a few other places to develop that further. There's just been a little bit of tentative experiment with some Delius manuscripts really at the moment, of all things. But yeah, that I could see a possible future, not just with Max, but with many other composers, to show that relationship between the sketches and the score and the performance, how it all comes together. Yeah.
Thank you, Chris. Does anyone have a question for any of our 4 speakers? Put your hand up or shake your jewelry or something. I've got a sort of a comment or a question or whatever, and I was fascinated by Lauren's contribution and Max as teacher, and I was fortunate enough to attend the 1996 composers course on Hoy, and that's where I met Tom. And we had a great time, didn't we, Tom? Maybe you could share your views of Max as a teacher, and how, well, I'm springing this on you, but in what ways that we could kind of learn from that and take Davis studies further in that field. His I don't know, I'm just thinking of Hoy, but there's also Dartington, of course, and the St Magnus Festival, etc., etc. So have you got any thoughts on that, Tom?
Yeah, I mean, looking back on it now, I think I was particularly lucky because I was the baby of that year's group, and I hadn't gone to university at the time. And he was incredibly kind, and because I really didn't know anything at all, it was kind of, he just was able to give me such basic stuff that the older people in the group, like you, Nick, had already knew. So I kind of learned a lot of that kind of basic stuff about, preparing parts. I mean, the main thing I remember, it's awful, is I always remember he said, you must never do a crescendo, Tom, without an indication at the end of the crescendo to where it's going to. And I always felt, sorry, can you hear me? Am I cutting out?
No, we can hear you absolutely fine.
No, so I said to him many years later, the last time I saw him, I got on I'd given a lecture at Aberdeen, and I got on the train, and they'd put me on a train back down to London, and Max was on the train. It was 5 a.m, and as I put my suitcase kind of onto the train, this voice said, "And what are you doing in first class?" Which I heard. And so that was the last time I saw him. And I did say to him then, I said, well, the main, I can't now write a crescendo on a score without putting something at the end of it. Otherwise, and if I don't, I feel terribly guilty. And he said to me, yes, guilt will do you some good. So, so that's my main thing. But of course, his influence as a teacher for so many people was so huge. And I think that probably is at this particular time with the arts, and the kind of, lack of engagement with the importance of music. He would have been a huge ambassador, and like all of these big figures, Bernstein's another, we missed their sort of cultural prominence, that they could punch above their weight as well, which and it's very, we need figures like that at the moment. But anyway,
And can I say also the terrible lack of ambition in our state schools to, Max always maintained you could teach and do anything, and that lack of ambition I find depressing, I have to say. I think we miss him.
Yes, we do.
Can Sylvia talk about Dartington a little bit? Sylvia, can you talk about Dartington? Some terrible.
Well, yes, I can. That was a long period in everybody's life. Max was he was what you might call a tartar in every sense. He would dismiss anyone who couldn't sit down at the piano and play bits of Beethoven symphonies. I actually didn't go to all of his lectures. I was busy doing other things, including his washing, of course. But his reputation as a teacher at Dartington was, his classes were always full, and his reputation was enormously high. Well, he was an inspiration to all of them. When he was in charge those 5 years, the other teachers that he had there were what everybody would have wanted. I mean, what can I say? It was just the most amazing 15 years of my life every summer, and especially those years when he was. Of course, I'm not a composer, so I didn't go to his classes, but I do know that everyone was in awe. And some of his lectures at those times were extraordinary. He used to give his lectures to people in places where everybody had to stand up. And most of the time he would be dancing around, illustrating magic squares, which was, well,
What about No and the car racing?
I was never there when No was there. I was there when Harry was there.
Right.
Harry didn't teach very much at Dartington. Harry was mostly there for the Pierrot players as they were then, and then of course not after that. I only really saw Harry in action as far as the group were concerned, not as the teacher. He wasn't teaching there very much at that time. What else can I tell you?
Well, I would have liked to have seen No racing round the main court at Dartington. That would have.
Yes. No, I missed that.
Okay.
Thanks for that, Sylvia. And I think, Chris, I'm just looking at the time, very mindful that we've gone past 4 o'clock, but I mean, I'm really enjoying this conversation, so I don't want to cut it too short, but I'll appreciate if anyone has to leave, then please just do so. But I think, Chris, you've got an observation from Max's time when he was teaching at the Royal Academy.
Yes, it picks up on partly something that Lauren said about Max as a potential example to younger composers. I can tell you that in the past, and including when Max was still alive and teaching at the Academy, I can think of maybe 1 or 2 young composers at any level, postgraduate or undergraduate, who've come to the Academy knowing anything about Max's music at all. Most of them would have known about him as a fact of musical life, really, it's not even a handful of people who would have known anything about the music. Now, obviously, I mean, certainly anyone who studied with me, that would have changed pretty quickly. But I would say that he was absolutely not part of the world of what was understood as as things to know about, in the way that he was for somebody of my generation. I'm 51, so when I was at university, I remember an exam question, an essay question being compare and contrast symphonic form in Tippett 4 and Maxwell Davies 3. I mean, that's, that was standard. So, and it's simply not the case now. And Max himself, in terms of his own expectations of the people who were studying with him in the broadest sense, he was, I think, to the end of his life, he was an absolute believer in the canon with a big C, and believing that everyone should know the Beethoven piano sonatas, the symphonies and so on, like the back of our collective hands. And I remember once he was not best pleased when I said to him that I didn't think that was a viable position for any of us to take any longer. Not that it was a bad thing in itself, but it was no longer a viable position as an educator of people in composition. But there are other things that are viable, of course. And to that extent, I mean, that represents a huge generational shift. But the thing about Max's technique, as much as we can talk about it, is that it is so idiosyncratic, and it reminds me of the thing that Lutosławski said about compositional technique. He said the technique of composition in and of itself does not exist. It cannot exist outside the act of creating music. It's not a thing that's there to be learned. And of course, the other thing that Luto said was that the only technique that's worth acquiring is the one that comes from your inspiration. And that means knowing yourself. And that's absolutely pertinent for Max, because that's the journey of his life as a human being and as an artist, which of course is indivisible with him, which is about knowing himself and finding the way to write. I mean, he did say to me once that he was prepared to be patient about finding the way to write his music. He wasn't in a hurry. And when he was first at Dartington as a student, when the only person who took him seriously was Malcolm Williamson, because everyone else found Max really old-fashioned because of his interests in Renaissance music and so on. He said, no, they said there were people far more advanced than me and blah, 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 blah. But he said, I was prepared to wait.
Yes, thank you for that very pertinent comment there, Chris. And yeah, it's sad that Max's music and his status sort of has dropped off. And
that's the bigger issue, isn't it?
Yeah, that is the bigger issue, and it's something I think we all have to come to terms with.
I've heard it from many composers as well. Oh, the best Max is the one in the 60s and blah 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 blah. What if you're a composer now and your favorite piece by Max is Orkney Wedding with Sunrise? Why not? Mm-hmm. I mean, that's as truthful and as complex in the best sense a work by Max as any other.
Sally,
I think one of the issues with Max is that he wrote so much, as we know, and for example, the Strathclyde Concerti, there'd be one every year, sometimes more than one a year, and you just sort of thought, oh yeah, that's great. But then last 2 years ago, I had the fourth in King's Place with Lawrence Power and Daniel Hope and Lawrence Power, and I was absolutely knocked sideways. Pardon? Oh. And you just realise then that if that had been the only piece in that, it would have made a huge impact. But because there were so many of them all the time, you kind of got, a bit knocked on the head with them. And I think that's one of the problems.
Sylvia, did you want to say something?
Yes, just that I know all of that, and I know how clever you know, 8 songs and all those wonderful pieces. And I loved them at the time, and I like hearing them again. I'm sorry we don't hear all of them, but anyone who heard the 10th Symphony couldn't possibly say that about Max. I mean, if you weren't in tears at the end of that, then, you know, so he had that gift right up to the end, and all those string quintets and things he wrote, you know, for the Nash and whatever, they're all stunning. They're just not known in the same way as 8 songs and Miss Donegal and so on.
Yeah, you're quite right. I was there for the premiere of the 10th, and oh, what a great work that is. I can always remember the chap next to me had his handkerchief out. He was absolutely sobbing away, and I wasn't too far behind myself. But thank you. Well, it's 4:10 now. I don't know if anyone has got a very quick question or comment they'd like to make before I just share the last couple of slides. Lauren.
Thank you. Sorry, I don't have the hand icon, so I'm just waving at you. I just wanted to briefly respond to Chris's comments about the canon and about education. And I wonder if this is a case of perhaps Max may be tailoring his expectations to students from different backgrounds. And I worked with Max in Canterbury Christ Church University for 5 years. And he, in that time, met with and taught a very large number of our students who, of course, come from quite a different demographic to the students at the Royal Academy. And for some composers, running a masterclass with such a broad variety of people, that can be difficult because they don't necessarily all share that kind of, you know, historical knowledge of music and in-depth knowledge of different composers. And there was never a hurdle to him in speaking to any one of them. Tom's anecdote about the crescendo and the dynamic markings is that's a comment that I heard made many, many times. So he was obviously full of that practical advice for composers in preparing their pieces, but also he seemed to be able to find the tone and the pitching of the comment that would speak to each of those individual people extremely easily. So, you know, to some of them, he really was advising them on their use of Italian terms in their scores. And to some of them, he was really inspiring them to find a way to think about music that they just hadn't accessed before. And that was actually very inspiring to me as someone who also has to teach composition, because his knowledge was immense. And we all know that from the conversations that we had with him, but also his ability to make that accessible to people who didn't have that kind of shared background and shared reference points to him was also very wonderful. And that's something that I certainly would like people to continue to know about in his legacy, because he wasn't only about teaching people about the canon, but he was really about enabling musicians to be able to express themselves from the point that he found them. And to me, that's something that was very important.
Thank you, Lauren. I think that's a really fitting sentiment to end on there. So thank you for that. Right, okay, we're going to come to the. Hope you don't mind that we've overrun. I think this conversation has been really, really lovely and engaging. So I've hopefully everyone is happy just to carry on a little bit longer. But we're going to come to the end now, and just want to share with you some of the future events that we've got planned for the network. Hopefully you've seen this doing the rounds. This should have taken place in March of this year, but of course COVID, April of this year, I apologize. But of course COVID knocked this one on the head. And so we have now rescheduled it and for the 20th of March next year. Hopefully it'll go ahead in some shape or form. I've got my fingers crossed. We are holding concerts in the concert hall in this School of Music at Cardiff University. It's a big concert hall, holds about 250. So at the moment, there's room socially distanced for people to be in there, around about 50 people to be in there. So fingers crossed, let's see how it goes. But There are going to be 8 research papers, and many members of our research group here will be delivering those papers, including Rodney, all the way from the US at the moment. We've got a roundtable discussion at the end, a lunchtime concert with 5 world premieres, the pieces from the 1940s and 50s. And we've also got an evening concert conducted by Joshua Balance, and his group will be doing 8 songs from Mad King. And if you're interested and you haven't seen it, there's the link at the bottom. And in terms of this idea of a Friday forum, Richard and I are very keen to continue this informal sense that we this formal environment which we're fostering today, actually, and it's a perfect environment to share ideas and to talk. So this Friday forum is a series of online seminars or tutorials, and what we're going to do is have a kind of a call for papers, work in progress, poster presentations, discussion topics in January 2021, but we are encouraging you to share any initial ideas on our Facebook page before then. And so, as I say, it's an opportunity for all members to share any aspect of Max's music life and career. And what I've done there is, or Richard and I have put a kind of a list of possible topics, and some of these have come up today: performing, interpreting Max's music, Max and music education, work for children and amateurs, Max and environmentalism, Max as teacher, that has been very prominent today, Max as public commentator, his legacy, sketch study, analysis, interpretation of works, and of course reception studies of his music. So there's lots of things that we can think about. And as I say, if you could share your ideas, you're very welcome to in the Facebook group. But we will be sending out this official kind of call for papers for the start of these Friday forums, which we're anticipating to start around about Easter next year. So after the in-person event at Cardiff University. Okay, Richard, did you want to say anything to conclude?
No, it just really to add to what you said, that I suppose the really important thing from going from here is that we get what we said, collaboration together, and working together through the things like the Facebook page and contributions, and actually allowing this to have a kind of organic growth. I really wouldn't want to put more than that. I think we can. There's so many things where we're sharing in this interesting times that we have. We have a good chance now to actually get things going, and it would be great to hear from anybody. I'm very happy to respond to any questions or any ideas, and I'm sure Nick is the same. And Nick and I will just share between us and then work together to actually get it to go forward. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Richard. So thank you everybody for coming today and contributing to that great discussion that we had there. It sets things up very nicely for the future, I think. And as I said, there are currently 35 in the network. The idea is to make that grow. And so if you do have any postgraduate students, for example, that would be absolutely wonderful to get them on board in this network as well. So thank you all for coming, and especially to our 4 speakers, Lauren, the 2 Chris's and Richard. Thank you so much for stimulating that discussion, and we look very much forward to welcoming you to future events as well. Please do keep in touch, and I'll send out a follow-up email with various bits of information on, such as the Facebook group link, and also a link to this video recording as well. Okay, so thank you very much, everybody. That's great. Thanks. Enjoy the rest of your evening.
Bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Nick,